Welcome to our channel, where today we unravel the incredible tale of the unmatched gaming skills of humans shocked the Galactic School. In this story, we dive into the interstellar dormitories where whispers of a new human student named Dave had everyone on edge. Expected to be a primitive brute, Dave's arrival was met with skepticism and low expectations. Little did we know, his presence would forever change the dynamics of our cherished game, Ascension of Alphas. Join us as we explore how this seemingly simple human outplayed the best minds of the galaxy, turning our understanding of strategy on its head. There were whispers that our dorm was about to host a human. We had lifted them from some backwater hellhole in the far reaches of space. We expected them to be similar in culture to the Bergen tribal lights, incapable of the most basic arithmetic brought to school on some obscene athletic scholarship. I had only heard rumors of what humans were capable of. They lived in mud and stone-paced buildings and threw fire at each other. I shuddered to think what silly tripe I have to endure before they were expelled for eating a student or behaving like some kind of animal. The human arrived, ushered forward by a Xeno Wrangler. He was introduced as Dave. The moment he spoke, I felt a tingling in my head. Was this human AS? Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. We were all forced by the Xeno Wrangler to introduce ourselves and perform the human custom of shaking hands. Eckler went first, and it took him a few painfully awkward moments to grasp the simplicity of the movements. He quickly wiped his hands and muttered something about oils. We walked around the room introducing ourselves and trying to come to terms with the human psionic presence. The moment the Xeno Wrangler left, we broke off all contact with Dave the human and resumed our session of Ascension of Alphas. I felt quite confident with my collection of vassal and clients from my recent campaign against Yada's colonies. Immediately, we all felt Dave peering over our shoulders as we prepared our actions for the turn and added dice to our planets. Dave mentioned that he had read about the game we were playing and expressed interest. I looked around the table. The other Xenos, the various Nakota and Arid, were quite happy to have another player at the table, while my fellow Varen were willing to have the human join them if it meant shifting the balance of power away from me. The traitor Dave picked up the game surprisingly quickly. He was dealt a few planet tokens and a small merchant navy to start with. He seemed quite happy with the mediocre planets he was dealt. Nobody could understand why all he had was one habitable planet and several barren worlds with only basic resources on them. No Yander, right? No placet deposits. We all felt pretty bad about crippling the human before he'd even started a few turns in the human. Asked some questions about what armies could build on planets. We humored him and told him the basics. He smiled and continued planning his expansions while the rest of us prepared our ambitions. I was still trying to figure out why he was smiling before I continue with this story. I should probably explain the game we're playing because its rules will be crucial later on. Ascendancy of Alphas is a 400-year-old game that tells the story of galactic ambition, typically played with 20 players and managed by a simple AI pyramid in the center of the table. Each turn represents a month in the game. During each turn, players allocate population dice to various activities within their empire, such as producing food-building ships, producing war materials, and harvesting resources. Meanwhile, hero units and leaders lead fleets, govern colonies, and use their skills to influence events. The AI processes the data from each turn and generates events for the players to deal with, sometimes interfering with player diplomacy, to ensure that power does not remain in one place. I personally managed to defy the AI and had well over 100 planets under my rule, bringing in vast amounts of wealth and technology compared to any other player. The goal of the game is either to conquer and subjugate all players, or to reach a diplomatic situation where no one can oppose you. Currently, only the Nakota holdouts and a few of my Viant brothers were still outside my influence. The reason I brought up the rules of the game is that for well over 300 years, it has been readily agreed that there is one way to ensure supremacy, having as steep a technology advantage as possible, and enough money to ensure the loyalty of those you cannot subjugate immediately through corruption and pirate raids. The only variation on this tried and true technique lies in the technology used. In your ships and the models of ships employed, I was a purist, and had foregone battleships in favor of my dimensional rift cruisers. With ultraviolet heavy lasers, they were expensive, but could __ a fleet in one turn, and jump to nearly any point in the galaxy when needed. Dave, however, seemed rather foolish to us, for ignoring our traditions and forging his own path. As the weeks went by, he continued to trade for worlds we didn't need or want, and only kept up with the average level of technology. However, he had invested heavily in counterintelligence, which made it difficult for me to see what the human was doing. While the rest of the players used explorers to further their research, Dave continued to expand and colonize backwater worlds that we would never dream of touching. Most of our worlds had populations in the millions, colonized a dozen systems, and had only outposts on most of our worlds. Dave, on the other hand, was proud when one of his worlds reached 50,000 people and considered it a great achievement. We all aided him and ignored his sandcastle empire in favor of actually winning the game. It was agreed that whoever won would have the honor of smashing the human. It had been a year of playing, or about 1,000 years in the game. Every other player either kneeled to me, or was so dependent on me that they kneeled out of necessity rather than obligation. Except Dave, because people can be pretty frustrating. Dave was sitting at the table and everyone was staring at him as he sat there with a big cocky smile on his face. I'd had enough. I had to put him in his place, so I informed him that we'd been going easy on him, and now that he knew the rules he could play like the rest of us. I ordered Eclair and his minions to attack Dave since they were closest, and Dave continued to smile Ekar, and I never saw eye to eye on most things related to AOA. I was a laser purist, but he had a more modern belief in the superiority of plasma weapons. They were closer range, but could melt through ships with ease. Barbaric. But it did the job. Ekar announced that he would use his expeditionary fleet to take Dave out, and Dave continued to smile because why not? Dave smiled and agreed that one expeditionary force was more than enough. At that point, we realized why he was smiling. When Dave and Eclair entered the battle screen, we thought the AI had made a rounding error. Dave's expeditionary fleet was easy 15 times larger than his accusations of cheating flew, but Dave insisted he wasn't cheating. The entire table clambered around the battle screen to investigate. Dave's ships were ancient, easily 500 years old, and had been retrofitted several times. There was a collective laugh as we realized that Dave was probably so far behind in technology that his expeditionary fleet, usually the most advanced of any fleet, was horribly outdated, and then the battle began. ECT's plasma light cruisers charged forward and were 2 turns away from reaching Dave's aging fleet. Everyone leaned forward to get a good view of the carnage, and eagle-eyed Nakota mentioned that Dave was using slug-throwing weapons. We giggled like open larvae and made finger guns at Dave. Then it was Dave's turn. He ordered his tightly packed fleet to spread out, but he didn't move. We looked around wondering why he was so calm. Eclair used one of his Nakota ships to fire a long-range laser. It sliced through the ship, crippling it. When Eclair finished his turn, Dave ordered his fleet to open fire for reference. One of my antimatter laser-equipped cruisers can fire 3 shots per turn, while his plasma cannons had 1 shot. His shields could withstand about 4 shots before being compromised. The smaller of Dave's ships could fire 7 shots, while the average ship could fire over 40. Eclair ships had a turn to dodge the attack, as they were primitive slug throwers. Eclair ships rolled well, but there wasn't much they could do to avoid the wall of explosive shells flying at them. The shells slammed into the formation, ripping apart the shields. The ship's armor was stripped and ripped away violently as Dave's ships closed to knife-fighting range. E's plasma cruisers were able to destroy swaths of ships, but for every one he destroyed, 5 broke through his defenses. Within 5 turns, Eclair withdrew his crippled ships into friendly territory, and the Nakota ship surrendered, and Dave stood still, smiling. Eclair did not take the defeat well. In fact, he gathered his entire emergency force and every planetary garrison he could muster, and ordered his Nakota allies to assist him in an attack. The Nakota informed him that their ships would take a turn to get into range. HFY didn't want to wait, and with fire in his eyes he charged into Dave's territory. This time Dave's expeditionary fleet suffered spectacular losses, and we all sighed with relief as we crushed his fleet. HFY glowed with barely contained fury as he raced into every system within reach to glass every occupied planet. We all had a moment of shock when another of Dave's fleets arrived, an assault fleet to be exact, compared to the expeditionary fleet. This one was titanic. The purple drained from his face, as the ships he'd spent decades building were reduced to scrap by the relentless bombardment of Dave's fleet. The Nakota, treacherous scabs that they are, seized the opportunity to invade territory with no defensive fleet, and only a merchant navy. The Nakota ravaged his systems, while his great fleet was encircled by Dave's armada of Da'aka. At this point, we all realized that Dave was actually quite good at AOA. I gathered all my allies and slaves, and prepared to tear Dave's empire apart. We would lead Dave's fleets dry and ravage his planets. He and his Nakota defectors would pay for their transgressions. Dave gave the Nakota the jewels of his empire. He took his remaining populations and fleets and fled to our territory. We gave him launch systems, which he didn't take too well. We quickly reminded him that he wouldn't be in this situation if he hadn't lost to a human fighting him with antiquities. He calmed down after that. We were all confident that we could defeat Dave and his allies. We used tactics honed by the great masters of this game. We had history on our side. We began warping into his territory to chip away at his vulnerable interior. Our skirmishes were swift and decisive. Dave would lose an average of 100 ships per turn as we ambushed him, but he was still smiling. We couldn't understand it. It had been well over 10 years in the game, and even our fleets were stretched thin. Dave's fleets were still growing. We could not understand how on earth he could sustain the carnage for so long. We explored his colonies to understand how he was capable of such sustained warfare. What we saw terrified us. It wasn't the size of his shipyards. It was the number. Traditional game theory says that more advanced shipyards are more valuable, because more advanced and expensive ships don't get lost as often, and they consume limited amounts of rare resources. Dave, however, had hundreds of shipyards, some configured for ancient designs. He had never modified the hulls of some ships. Only the equipment on board his populations were scattered, but the seedling colonies he'd grown were all in the low millions. While we spent years constructing individual works of art, he was gluing ships together as fast as the metal would cool. Worse, none of the ships used rare resources. What followed next I will remember as the most soul-wrenching month and a half of my life. Every time we sat down at the table, I knew I was going to see another of my beautiful ships drift into the void. Each turn, Dave and his growing group of allies ate away at my territory, until eventually the fateful day came. I was down to my last clutch of core colonies. I thought of the years I'd spent carefully planning and developing them, and now I had to look Dave in the eyes and yield, and he was still smiling. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Galactic School and the shocking prowess of Dave the human. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected triumph and strategic genius, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more fascinating tales from the universe. Share your thoughts and let us know if you've ever underestimated someone, only to be proven wrong in the most spectacular way. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the unexpected.